if you have a delicate nature that we have, and you put a lot of people in it, the delicate nature is eroded. So what you have to sell is no longer there to sell. So it's a question of who is first to sell what we have before it's destroyed. It's a finite resource like anything else.
Willkommen zu einer weiteren Ausgabe von A Palava. Architektur im Radio.
Eine Sendereihe von Kathrin Huber und David Paschek. Welcome to episode 268. Building on new ground, architecture at 64 degrees north. Iceland is one of the youngest geologies on Earth, a land of superlatives, of light and wind and weather that imprints itself on everything, including the act of building. For centuries, it built in turf. Then, in just a few decades, concrete became the national material, and a country of fewer than 100,000 people passed a planning act as early as 1921. Today, it's the most sparsely populated country in Europe and one of the fastest growing, pulled between fishing, tourism, and a landscape that defies human scale. So, how do you build here? What does building culture mean in a place that is still quite literally in the making? After 2 weeks circling the island and returning to Reykjavik, I knew these questions deserved an episode of their own. To answer them, I met 3 practices, each wrestling with the Icelandic context in its own way. This is Building on New Ground, and I am your host, Kathrin Huber.
There are certain images which are connected to what is considered to be Icelandic architecture. So if you go back to the vernacular, how people existed here on this island, they used the materials they had. So they used driftwood and turf and a few sticks that they brought over on a boat. That made buildings, which buildings then gradually become a vernacular architecture, which then become an image of an architecture. So you see the gable roofs, you'll have seen that. And you could argue that is Icelandic architecture. There's also been a development here, especially in concrete was first brought. And the concrete sort of made a new dialogue or a new language of architecture here. And it was most interesting because the people that were skilled in making buildings actually were making the timber buildings before. The timber buildings were imported. So they're not an Icelandic building, they were imported. But the craftsmen that made them were then making the formwork for the concrete buildings. So that made a certain, let's say a new Icelandic building typology. Since then, it's anything goes. This office will be 40 years old next year, and we spent those 4 decades trying to understand how you should build on this island. And you can build in lots of different ways, and it can fit in lots of different ways. There is no rule book. And in a way, that is Icelandic architecture, is there is no rule book. It doesn't need to look like Icelandic architecture. It just needs to be appropriate to where it is.
We begin with Studio Granda, a practice that has quietly shaped Iceland's architectural identity for decades, from Reykjavik City Hall to the Supreme Court. I spoke with Steve Christa about what it means to build with that kind of long, patient influence on a place.
Probably the most important thing to do when you're working in Iceland is forget everything you learned in architecture school, because there are many things we do, and I'm still trying to unlearn now, after all these years, because we automatically do things which are how we're supposed to do them because we've been taught that way. I'm taught educated as a modernist architect. That means I don't do anything symmetrical. Okay? Just that. It's a simple thing. And then some years ago, somebody asked if we could do a rebuild of a building that burnt down.
Yeah, I read about that. The cinema.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden we have these three gables, and they're all symmetrical. And it's, oh my God, I can't do this. You know, and you're starting to have palpitations because it's not what you do.
Yeah.
And actually, when you then go into it and you work with that imagery or that way of thinking, it opens a new door. So you realize all these years, I've actually been blocking a whole new vista of opportunity in architecture because I've been taught I shouldn't do anything symmetrical. It's a question of just embracing. Of course, it's very quick to go into kitsch if you're not careful. You have to be aware of that. So you are allowed to use some of the things that you learn in school, but you have to use them as tools for seeing what's around you instead of laws of how you should or should not do things. Sometimes you have a great idea and it only has a lifetime of 24 hours, so you dump that one. The other time you have an idea that you don't know if it's a good one or a bad one, but after 2 weeks it's still there. I say, okay, there's probably some life in this idea. And that's how you build things up. We just make sure that it has some longevity, some sort of staying power. Because if it's something that you're immediately attracted to, it's normally something, it's like fashion or fast fashion. We're just a tiny office and we work on this little island.
Yeah.
You use the tools or the materials that you have at hand. Mm-hmm. So that's what makes the architecture. So it's not really trying to follow any trends or fashions or anything like that. Mm-hmm. It's just at any given time, there are only so many materials that are on offer because we have to import the greater proportion of things. There are only so many skills on offer, and they're changing because of how the workforce is changing. Right now, we have very few locally skilled people. Most of our people actually come from abroad. And then also just the technologies change. So how you make things change. And then you have to work with those realities with your architecture. If it ends up being critical regionalism or postmodernism or whatever you want to call it, that's what you can call it. But as far as we're concerned, we're just trying to make buildings that are appropriate to be on this place on the planet.
Basalt architects. With the retreat at the Blue Lagoon, they set their architecture directly into an 800-year-old lava flow, a place where the earth itself acts as a co-designer. I spoke with Rolfur Karlsela about building where the ground is anything but neutral.
Well, Iceland is a lot of different things depending on where you are in Iceland. So I think that's the most important common thread. Whatever the project is, we try to use the material from the site as much as we can. You saw this in the retreat, both where the landscape becomes part of the building, literally, but also using bits and pieces from the earthwork to create furniture. We infuse the lava in the terrazzo floor, so it's essentially made from the same material as the site. So it's things like this that we try to do, and all the materials need to also last. That's something that most of the bathing lagoons have in common, that the water has certain properties that is kind of harsh on materials. Like in the Blue Lagoon, we have the salt in the water and the minerals, the algae. This is great for you as a person, but not so great for the building materials. So everything needs to be chosen with this in mind. And sometimes we have seawater as the water, so that's of course salty. And then you have to choose the materials also with that in mind. Yeah. So the material use is, like I said, as much as we can get close to the site as possible. Mm-hmm. And a great example is also all the way out east. That's a bathing lagoon there. Mm-hmm. This is work. It's two floating pools in the middle of a lake. They kind of rise and fall with the tides of the lake. But there's a forest in the area, which the area is kind of famous for. And we used some of the wood logs that are sourced from that forest, and we put them in the concrete cast, so that we're kind of recreating the woods of the area in the concrete. And the concrete itself is made from one of the glacial canyons just next to the site or nearby the site. So it's kind of a mix of that and the forest, which are indicative and kind of emblematic of the area. Yes. I mean, where we are today is a very different place that we were 50 years ago, or even 80 years ago, or 100 years ago. Today, everything, all over the world, of course, is getting maybe a bit more the same. I think Icelanders are kind of looking for their own character again now, after having gone through a really big construction boom that is a little bit generic, if I may say so. But before that, it was all about building with the materials that we had, and because resources were scarce, importation was infrequent and unstable, so we would use turf and stone and whatever we could, driftwood, to create a turf house, which was essentially the kind of quintessential Icelandic building heritage. Yeah. So maybe to some extent we're looking back and trying to find some kind of soul in that to infuse into our current architecture, but that's it's difficult to do. The Blue Lagoon is part of a geothermal park, let's say, or an area. One part is the power plant next door. Another one is the Blue Lagoon, and then there are other facilities, around it. And recently we've been having a period of volcanic eruptions in the Reykjanes Peninsula around the Blue Lagoon. We've had something like 11 eruptions in the last few years, and each one of them is slightly unpredictable. And we've had some that would have destroyed the whole facility, both the power plant and the Blue Lagoon, if we had not, made man-made lava berms around the whole facility. If it was not for the human intervention, then this would all be under lava. That's a fact. And we had some close calls, actually. Another example is in the north of Iceland, where we're working in a high heat area. It's actually similar looking water. It's not the same chemical composition, but it's blue also that we have over there. It's the earth baths in Mývatn, and they're built in a high heat zone. So wherever you put the shovel in the ground, you just get steam coming up. It doesn't matter where you do it. And so we had the problem there where we had to insulate the building from the heat in the ground. Usually it's cold or something else you need to protect yourself from. So it kind of resulted in us having to build a basement underneath the whole thing. And we were going to try to use the heat as a source directly to heat the building coming from the ground. The problem there was that we didn't have enough cold water to counteract the heat from the ground. And then, of course, with the earthquakes, that applies to the whole country to different extents. We have designated areas that are ranging from 1 to 5 on a kind of earthquake danger scale, 5 being the most difficult to work with. And that's oftentimes the same areas that we work in because of the geothermal heat connected through the rift through the country. So this is obviously a challenge and sometimes a little bit of a fight with the engineers, how far we can push it. And then, of course, we have, I think, what is underestimated is the wind that we have here. Usually, when we talk to material vendors like window salesmen or whatever it is in foreign countries, and we give them the country loads that we have here for wind. They say, no. Yeah, this is a mistake. You're doing something wrong. When you have 70 meters per second, you have to take precautions. It's a double hurricane strength, yes. It's constructability. I mean, there's only certain things you can do in a situation like this. But, if you're careful about it, you can do interesting things.
Next, PK architecture. Its founder, Halmar Krismundsson, brought a design sensibility home from years of study in Japan and introduced a new scale to Reykjavik with Turnin, a high-rise that remains controversial in an otherwise low-lying city. Anja Schröter and I sat down with him.
First, when I came back from Japan and I made the first buildings, people said, "Oh, there's nothing Japanese about it." And I had to explain it's not the question of copying it. It's a question of using the terminology or the concept and so on, how to mix architecture and landscape. So I was really happy that it doesn't look Japanese, but the philosophy behind it was inspired from that. It's about how you treat landscape, or how one experiences landscape and the built environment. Even though the landscape might be some different, it's still the respect for nature. That's the point, and how you treat it and how you experience it in connection with the built environment. So I think that makes sense here, and the likeliness between Iceland and Japan is much more than you can imagine here. Nordic architecture is highly inspired by Japanese architecture, but also Japanese architects, they love the Nordic style. So it's kind of vice versa, but of course buildings and built environment in Japan is much older than we have here in the Nordic areas. So mainly we are learning from the old philosophy of landscape and building. So
that of course we try to implement nature and certain shapes into it, but I wouldn't say it's particularly shaping the architecture. If it fits, if it suits the purpose of the building, then sure it will have an effect into it, but not like from the start.
And the best thing was everybody hates the project. So when the turbine was built, it ended, or it crashed straight into the economical crash here. It was standing there, just a structure, and of course it was like a symbol of the economical crash. After it was built, and we were doing the next building, which was the hotel, and we were presenting it at the city, and everybody was looking at the drawings and said, "Oh, this is so ugly. Why couldn't it be like the Turnin?"
But I think it's an Icelandic thing of first disliking everything. I mean, Harpa, for instance, also people not really were that happy. And then just over the time it grows onto them. And then it quite, Well, it was certainly a novum in that sense. I mean, there was this debate about is this a skyrise or not? And then, because if you take that shape, the size of the building into any other big European city, this is not a high-rise building. But for Icelandic scale, it did. Certainly, it was controversial, but I think it grew onto the city. People started to accept it and actually starting to like it. And it was back in the days, quite a challenge, I would say, to go through with it. And we faced quite some criticism, of course. The height in particular, we are also facing, like any other city, shortage on apartments. So eventually we are forced to go up because we don't want to spread out endlessly. Yeah. I think it's the nation or the people are still divided between liking it and not liking it. There's kind of almost no gray area.
We started this project 22 years ago, and it's actually now, this summer is the last piece in it, which is the landscape in between the buildings, which is our landscape design. And we have 2 sculptures there, one from Kristin Hrafnsson, the Icelandic artist, and one from another Icelandic artist, Sigrun Ólafsdóttir, which had just been put up now last week or something. So we have our inspection in 2 weeks or something, and then finally it's done. It's done, we hope.
Sie hören Apalava, Architektur im Radio.
Eine Sendereihe von Kathrin Huber und David Paschek. Welcome back to Building on New Ground. You've met all three voices now, and you've heard where each of them stands. In the next stretch, we turn to the force that has reshaped Iceland faster than almost anything else: tourism. Since the 2008 crisis, the country has leaned hard on visitors, and the built environment shows it. Massive hotel complexes, new infrastructure, whole settlement carving themselves into a landscape that was never meant to hold them. The architecture is caught in the middle, asked to welcome millions, to perform the very wilderness people travel to see, and somehow not to consume it in the process. So what does it mean to build for the tourist gaze in a country still defining itself? That's the question for the next part of the hour.
You step into a landscape like this, it's so incredibly dramatic and pristine and kind of violent and, characteristic. You really, the number one thing you would like to do is to do nothing. I have to say, even though we are architects,
Just plant signs, there's nothing to see here.
even something like yes, but that's usually not our task when we're hired to do something. So at least we can try to do it as carefully as we can.
And moderate it.
Of course, the Blue Lagoon was there before, the previous phases of the Blue Lagoon, all of whom we've worked on since the 90s. But if we talk about the improvisation at the retreat, for instance, and this we have repeated also in other places, is that you can only look at the surface to begin with. You can only guess what's happening underneath the surface. And in the case of the retreat, when the earthwork started, we had kind of drawn out the lines of the building one to one with a rope on the ground, meaning that no machine or person could step a foot outside that rope. Only the building footprint and the lagoon footprint, that's it. You cannot step outside. But when the earthwork started, we wanted to keep it open. So that's where the improvisation comes in. That if we found something revealed itself in the ground, and it could be an interesting part of the building in the end, because we have a lot of lava formation coming into the building, then we'd have a chance to say, okay, stop. Let us have a look at this interesting thing that you found. And then we integrate it into the building, and maybe this room changes like that, and the other one changes a little bit also, and we have to redraw and remodel and everything. And
It was possible to adapt.
yes,
Yeah.
and then they can keep going. And then like I said, we've done this in a couple of other projects as well. It's a real privilege, I have to say, because working with the landscapes, actually taking them into the buildings, so the landscape itself becomes the building, is something that we have become experts at, and we love to do, because you just feel the place, in the building. It becomes kind of a mix of the two. It's true, it takes a lot of craftsmanship to adjust to these natural formations. So it's a lot of patience and love and craftsmanship, and of course, when you put so much love and effort into something, it is something that translates into the guest experience in the end. It's like a piece of art, you put a lot of craft and effort and experience into it, and it's felt in the end.
If you have a delicate nature like we have, and you put a lot of people in it, the delicate nature is eroded. So what you have to sell is no longer there to sell. So it's a question of who is first to sell what we have before it's destroyed. It's a finite resource like anything else. And what we do when we go for a walk is we may walk up a mountain. And if we meet somebody halfway up that mountain, we go down again to go up another mountain because it's got crowded. And now we have to go into the hinterland to get that experience because we've got crowds of people everywhere. You go to the mountain you used to go to and there's a busload on the top of it. Or somebody selling hot dogs. This isn't Iceland. The best thing that happened to Iceland in the last 10 years or so was COVID. we got the island back. It was amazing. We went to these places that we stopped going to. You know, we could walk around behind a waterfall and you'd be the only person there. And I say, what's happened is we've built an awful lot. We haven't made a lot of architecture. We're really feeling the growing pains. So there's a lot of boxes going up. And essentially, they're almost like Soviet boxes, but they're just in different colours. We go out, move for a drive, and say, oh, I don't remember this. You know, it changes at 6-month intervals. It's extraordinary. It's slowing now because the economy is such that risen the interest rates so that nobody's buying anything for the moment. There'll be a small hiatus. Tourism is probably taking a small slowdown, thankfully, in my opinion. And that means that things get a bit quieter. Maybe we get a few less hotels for the moment. Wait 5 years and off it goes again.
Tourism, I mean, I think good things have come out of it, but it's starting to be maybe, you start to think, okay, how far is it going to go? You get spa everywhere, hotels everywhere.
Well, it's a lot of, just in terms of the architecture, a lot of hotels that being built all over the places, and sometimes in quite unfortunate or beautiful places, but it's unfortunate that the hotel has been plopped in there. Everyone is trying to get the most out of it, and I feel like this is kind of a taking over in many areas.
But we still have areas huge areas that are not impacted. Like, for instance, for me, being born and raised up in the Westfjords, where most of the tourists, they pass. We are free of this there. I mean, I used to say there are two T's that I don't want in the Westfjords. There's what, trees and tourists. So.
The funny thing is that usually the bathing lagoons, in most of our cases, they don't start out as tourism projects. You know, they're essentially happy accidents, if you will, because the water usually is not obtained to produce a touristic site, but it's a runoff from some kind of other production or something that was found by accident or something like this. So working with the different kinds of water that we have across the country and the very different geological sites is at the heart of each project. And then, of course, we work closely with the client to fulfill his vision and you know the task at hand. So it's a mix of using the water resource in a clever way, using the landscape or working with the landscape and working with the client. We're a country of 400,000 people. I think the current prediction is that we receive 2 million tourists per year. Yeah. This puts enormous strain on the infrastructure, of course. I think one of the things that has been a part of the policy here in the country is to spread this out so that it's not concentrated in very few areas. This means spreading it out into more places of the country, but also into a longer season so that everybody's not always there at the same time. And I think something that the design needs to do is try to respond to this so that the places that we create are, able to receive people at different times of year and kind of accommodate the different seasons that Iceland has to offer. So, which are great, actually. We are all about seasons here. Our mood and character is shaped by it a lot more than I think we ourselves know. We have to be careful with the places that we work with, and some should not be touched at all. But there will always be a debate, no matter where you're setting foot in virgin ground. Not everybody's going to be 100% happy with it, but what we can do is try to do it as carefully as we can and not disturb anything that does not need to be. Our architecture, especially when we're working in kind of delicate landscapes, is all about, making our intervention a platform to enjoy what was already there, not destroy what was there, but enable people to inhabit it and be part of it and experience what is already there. And this can be a tricky thing to do. There's a line where you go over the selling point, like you were saying, and kind of selling an image. So as long as your approach to architecture is kind of true, you're actually using real stories, real materials, real history, real landscapes, not trying to create something that's fake. That's the place you should be, because again, it's a easy line to cross.
I mean, it's a challenge to do that. I think, for example, with turnin, you kind of have to say, what can I do? How can I adjust it to something, some nature in some way? And the scale is completely different from what we've done in the smaller buildings. So I think at the time we were saying there has to be some miniature details in it, so that the big scale is actually broken down into smaller details. And with the turnin, we made this small inclines in the windows, which is more like an origami play, and say, okay, this is makes it into a fabrics in some way, and then there is the reflection of the surroundings. But of course, this is different approach than when you sit by the window and you look out at the nature. I mean, but when you get even up on what is it, 19th floor? I mean, you have nothing but nature around you. So through the years, we've been always discussing about why we're not using stone more. Obviously, tree is a rare thing in Iceland. But the reality is it's we come back to cost and so on. It's cheaper to order a natural stone from China than taking it from the mark here and work it to a usable unit. It's ridiculous. We always wanted to use stone more, but usually killed by the cost. So that's why I think we haven't used stone that much, because we really want to use the local material and not import something. Yeah, I think that's more, basically our take on this.
Erlu, góðu Erlu sem giftist mér því ég kunni að skaffa sjómaður og sonur að snappa. Hlakka svo til að hitta börnin, Maríu, Hænu, Hafþór og Örnin, vinna tíma, klippa smá og líma, í eltingaleik fram að 8 tíma. Ég þekki ekki annað, afi var harmenni, annað var mamma. Sultuslög Nunna, systir mín, Gunna, Funna, Rósi var örugglega vængivinn frændi, rændi mig æskunni. Afi, ég þekki ekki annað, afi var harmenni, annað var mamma. Sultuslög Nunna, systir mín, Gunna, Funna, Rósi var örugglega vængivinn frændi, rændi mig æskunni. Þegar heim komið bíður mín flaskan og á tröppunum stendur ferðataskan. Erla góða fór með vini á hestbak, síðasti túr hann keyrði þverbak. Þegar ég að botnin á því bara standa upp aftur. Þetta veit hver heilbit aftur. Vaknandi mönnum best að lifa. Lífi geta bara ég þið höfð ekkert að stefa. Ég þekki ekki annað, afi var harmenni, annar var mamma. Sultuslög Nunna, systir mín, Gunna, Funna, brósi. Var örugglega vanginn, frendi, rendi mig æskunni. Afi, ég þekki ekki annað, afi var harmenni, annar var mamma. Sultuslög Nunna, systir mín, Gunna, Funna, brósi. Var örugglega vanginn, frendi, rendi mig æskunni.
Sie hören Apalava, Architektur im Radio.
Eine Sendereihe von Kathrin Huber und David Paschek. Welcome back to the last part of Building on New Ground. We've talked about landscape, material, about the pressure of tourism. But position is one thing. The daily work of building is another. Since September 2025, most new building permits in Iceland require a life cycle assessment, an LCA. In plain terms, that means calculating the climate impact of a building across its whole life, the materials, the construction, the years of use, and eventually the demolition. Until recently, this was voluntary, often tied to eco-labels. Now it's part of the building code, and the country plans to set binding carbon limits by 2027 or 2028. So the question for our guests is a practical one. What changes when the carbon cost of a building has to be calculated before its approval?
You have a lot of planning issues here, and the greater part of planning that we see being built now is built because of financial pressures. Either the city or the municipalities are trying to maximize the value of the land that they're selling, or the contractors are trying to make as much money out of whatever they're building. So the idea of making spaces that people want to live in is, in my view, quite far down the list. And this is actually becoming really difficult because we're making environments that are far too shaded, for example. You have flats that don't even have sunlight, or they only have sunlight for very few hours of the day. They're just unpleasant environments. And when you live in a place like this, which is very high on the globe, sun is really important.
Yeah,
just daylight. In wintertime, we don't have any daylight. So even just to get some sort of daylight into your flat is essential for you to exist as a human being, just have a decent life. So yes, we have the planning laws, we have the planning system, but I think the result of that system isn't particularly effective. It means there's going to be less time and less money to do design. All these things, the idea is that you get a more ecological building. You don't get any more money, you don't get any more time to do your design. Mm-hmm. So everything that you put into that accreditation comes out of your budget of time and money for designing. When we did the City Hall, I would say that we spent about 80% of our time in design. I'd say I'm lucky to spend 3 to 5% of my time now because I have all these other things to do. And I'm actually not getting as good a design because they don't have the time or the money to do it. So it's a question, something has got to give somewhere. The idea that you're looking at the life cycle analysis is a very good idea. Yes, let's think about how things are going to last. It's also a good idea. We're thinking about the environment. We purchase materials or how we apply them or how we move them from one place to another. Totally agree. Mm-hmm. The bottom line is those issues are what you are doing when you are doing architecture. That is your job. Why? When you've learned that process, or you should have learned it, and you should have acknowledged it, and you should incorporate it in your design, why do you have to have somebody in an office somewhere that doesn't even know where the building is, putting a rubber stamp on what you are doing anyway? So there is a dilemma. Now, of course, not everybody is such a nice person as I am, because I'm so sort of wholesome and I really believe I save the planet and all these things. Yes, of course, everybody cheats somewhere. So the idea is that with these accreditations is that there is some body that stops everybody from cheating. That's essentially what it's saying. If you look at it around the other way. Mm-hmm. Of course, nobody ever wants to say it that way, but that's essentially what it is. Yeah. But if we make that assumption that everyone's trying to do something as badly as possible, instead of as well as possible, then we're in a slightly difficult position. That's not how I want to think about other human beings. I want to be positive in the way I look at them. I want to say, yes, I will hire these young people because I know that they're hungry and I know they want to do a good job. Yeah. And I know they want to use the materials of the spaces as well as they can.
I think it will be helpful because we have been a little bit sloppy about it.
Yeah? Okay.
Historically, yes, I think so. Iceland is very rich in our heating resources and other things, so we've kind of thought we had the privilege of not having to deal with a lot of things like other countries in Europe and other places in the world have to do because we're so rich in resources. But it's time to face the reality that actually we're not. We're part of a whole economic system and we all have to work together on the solutions for climate change. We are a little bit behind, I'd say, our Nordic colleagues who are much further along in these matters. What's being done at the moment in Iceland is that you have to calculate new buildings, the CO2 emissions, but there's no specific requirement in place. They're just trying to figure out what the baseline for Iceland is. So they're gathering all the data from the new construction that's happening. You're not required to keep it at a minimum. It's like a real-time data collection. And then what comes out of that work is trying to define goals in lessening this. As much as we can, yes, but it takes a lot of different aspects. It's not just us. It also takes the client to understand the value in the improvisation. It takes time, and time usually translates to money. So if you have to align these different things, and that the whole team is also willing to do this, not just you, but engineers and everybody involved. So if you get that kind of constellation of people, then yes.
Definitely a paper job.
I mean, the thought behind it is nice and is good. And definitely we need that. But sometimes it feels just like greenwashing. It's just a labeling of something, but there's no actual impact.
I don't know if there is such a big difference, but I mean, we are pretty much doing the same thing. We just have to write it down or fill out the form and somehow prove that we are what we are using or what we're doing. Don't think there is that big a difference, even though the restriction is that you file it somehow, that you are thinking this way or not.
We won a competition. Everyone was very happy. We got a bunch of flowers, kiss on the cheek. And then everyone decided that it's a very nice building, but it shouldn't be in the location that it's in. Mm-hmm. So then we went through the process of designing it with actually more people in the organization opposing the building than were designing it. and there was something in the newspaper almost every day opposing the building. What was remarkable is the mayor at the time, even though his following plummeted, if I remember right, from something like 60% to 37%, mostly because of this building, he continued with it. When the building opened, it was about 1/3 of the population of the country came through the building in the 2 days that it was open, viewed it all. After that, nobody says anything. So it's sort of, one of those nice stories. But when you're in the middle of it, you have to ask yourself, who am I working for? Should I really be doing this job? So it's a multifaceted discussion that you then have to weigh up as a young architect. So, green behind the ears, didn't know anything. And we're stuck in this situation that we have to decide, are we going to make, our future careers on this building? Or do we say, we're very sorry, we shouldn't take part in it? What's right and what's wrong in this equation? I think in hindsight, we probably did the right thing, but it was touch and go. You try not to use nasty stuff. Okay, of course, you don't want to use nasty. You don't want to use things that are toxic. The problem is that everything that's good on the planet is toxic. If you want good paint, it's got nasty stuff in it. Can we stop putting lead in it for a long time ago? The lead made it really smooth to paint. Now we've got all sorts of nasty plastics instead. And then instead of that, we put some sort of water-based stuff, which makes the paint completely useless. And because of that, the paint then doesn't last as long, which means you have to paint more often. And is that more ecologically friendly than having something nasty? Personally, we prefer to have things natural. So it's great to use wood that comes out of a tree, just as it comes out of a tree. Yeah. It's great to use rock that you can get from a mountain and you cut it as little as possible. It's great, any material that you have, use as purely and effectively as you can. Sometimes, to get your longevity, to get the product that you want for something that is actually workable and makes sense, you have to use some things that are unpleasant.
That brings us to the end of building on new ground, 3 practices, Studio Granda, PK Architecture, and Basalt. 3 ways of working with the same landscape, the same constraints, and increasingly the same rules. What stayed with me is how differently they answer one shared question, what it means to build in a place that is still taking shape. My thanks to Steve Christer, to Palma Christmundsson and Anja Schröter, and to Hulofurka Sela for their time and their candor. You'll find links to all 3 offices in the show notes.
Das war eine weitere Ausgabe von A Palaver, Architektur im Radio.
Eine Sendereihe von Kathrin Huber und David Paschek.
Weiterführende Links, diese und viele vergangenen Episoden als Stream finden Sie auf der Website von A Palaver, www.apalaver.com. Über die Website können Sie auch den Newsletter anmelden und wir laden Sie ein, der Sendereihe auch auf Instagram und Facebook zu folgen.
I am Kathrin Huber. Thanks for listening and until next time.
The wonderful thing about being an architect is you, as an individual, have an incredible responsibility. And that's really giving. And it isn't about making monuments. It's just having the opportunity to make the environment that we live in better. I get a really great kick out of that. Yeah. When somebody comes up and says, I've been working in that building for so long, and I just noticed this the other day, and I really like it, or the light comes in nicely in the morning, or we get the negative things too, of course, and so we should, and we learn from that. But that for other people, it's actually changed their lives to be in a building that we have maybe been involved in. Mm-hmm. That's really giving, and that's what makes this job so wonderful. So, that the fact we've been able to do that, I don't know what other job you could do. I have no idea what other job it could be.
Thank you.